Hi, in this video I'd like to give you a few pointers and an explanation about how to use the new text analytics module within Loadit. So my starting point for this example is going to be a set of verbatim data here I've got relating to cinemas, and I'd like to run these verbatims through the text analytics using Loadit. So the first thing I need to do is obviously bring that data in. I'm going to use the CSV module to do that here in Loadit. So you can see my data comes in with the verbatims here in this V1134 column. And to run the text analytics, there's a text analytics transformation module which is new. I add that in and link that to my CSV file. And then I'm prompted to configure the text analytics module. So as a minimum, we need to tell it which fields to use, and we also need to provide some authentication information. So let's start with the fields. I need to pick a unique ID field, so that may be survey ID or interview ID or something like that, but it has to be unique for each row in the data that you're putting in. And then you have to tell Loadit which columns you want to apply the text analytics to. In my case, I've only got one column, this one here, but obviously you can apply the text analytics to as many columns as you want or as you have in your data there. So that's the fields configured. You then need to give Codit and Loadit some authentication information, and this is because Loadit actually uses Codit as the backend to perform the text analytics. So you need to identify yourself by means of an access key. Now to find out your access key, when you log into Codit, here I am at coditapp.com, you can click on the administration link here, and when you click on the people section and click on an individual person, you'll see the API key appears on the right here. And the easiest way of copying that is clicking the copy to clipboard link, like so. So with that done, I can go back to Loadit and I can paste that into the access key field there. So as a minimum, that will get you started and Loadit will be able to produce something. You'll notice that if we look at that data, it's actually Loadit has produced a whole set of dummy data. The columns that are output are the common columns that will be output for real when you run this. But by default, because each verbatim that you put through the text analytics is essentially chargeable against your quota, by default, what Loadit does is just generate some dummy data and doesn't actually run the text analytics for real. So this allows you to set up your Loadit package, configure it, and play with it without actually running the text analytics and incurring any cost against your quota. So to control that setting, within the options here, you can untick generate dummy data in design mode, and when I press OK this time, it'll have a bit of a think, and when it resumes, we should find some text analytics results are output, like so. The first thing you'll notice that the number of records in 335 is actually less than the number of records out, and this is quite common because the text analytics can produce multiple output rows for each row that is input. We'll see that in action here. If I sort by ID here, you'll see that the text analytics for this interview here has found, within this long verbatim here, has found 3 separate weak positive sentiments. So trendy cinema, trendy way, better experience. So that's the first thing to bear in mind, that you are going to get multiple records out for the records that you put in. The next most important thing, I think, is this type column, which then categorizes those rows. So the key ones are sentiment, which obviously tells you whether the extract that it's found is positive or negative, and noun groups is also very useful, especially for building code frames, because this gives you information about a thing or a topic or an idea that the text analytics has found within the verbatim text. So that's the output. In terms of other settings in here, you can, if you like, cache these results when you're working here in design mode. So that means that next time this runs, it doesn't actually perform the text analytics for real. It'll just recycle the previous results that it had in memory. So that can speed things up quite nicely when you're working here in design mode. If I go back to the output data here, you'll see if I sort by type, somewhere near the top, if I do it the other way around, there's a number of blank rows here, and that's because the text analytics doesn't always return a row for each, or results for each row that you put in. It may be that there's an empty verbatim or a very short verbatim, or there's the text analytics is unable to extract anything from the verbatim you give it, and in which case there are no text TA results as a consequence. Now, those rows with blank results are output if you have output all input rows ticked. If I untick that, what we should see, although I've cached the results, so I end up getting the same ones back. If I just untick that for a second, you should see then that when we sort by type, there are no blank rows. So we're actually, in this case, only returning items where there are results, and so interviews with no results are then not included in that result set. You can also apply the TA to a sample of rows rather than all rows. So, for example, if you had a huge amount of data, you might just want to apply the text analytics to the first 2,000 rows to just to get a steer on the data or whatever. So that allows you to kind of limit the amount of stuff that the text analytics, or the amount of records that the text analytics operates on. And then the last setting is this attach fields. So if I just come out of here, we look at the original data, you'll see that we've got the ID field that we selected, and we've got the verbatim column, and both of these are exported or output by the text analytics module, in addition to the text analytics fields that get appended on. But somewhere along the lines, gender and age are being lost. They're not being output here, and that might be what I want. My Loadit package may be much more interested in crunching the results here than outputting those supplementary fields. But if I do want those extra supplementary fields, I can attach them using this tab here. So I can say I want gender and age, and I want those attached to the results when it's output. And there we go. You should find now that in addition to all the fields that we saw before, we have gender and age appended onto the results, and then I can obviously go on and have further downstream processes set up in Loadit that do stuff with these results. So that's it. Pretty straightforward. I hope that all makes sense. Obviously, feel free to get in touch if you have any questions. Thanks.